It's crazy. This is a crazy cycle we're in, and we're societally conditioned to consume noise to the point that our brains are in a perpetual state of fog. We deal with this. We know how this feels because we live it. So how can a Christian that is conditioned to consume noise combat the noise in favor of a clear relationship with the Father? David says of God in Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God. Then I will be exalted in the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." We have to be still to know him. Origen said, "It is not possible to know him if one has not become still and purified in one's mind." Today we continue our sermon series on the spiritual disciplines, right? In each of these we have always come back to our main text. This is seriously important for what we're talking about this whole series, and that's why we come back to it each week. What's the point of being disciplined in prayer or in study or service or worship? What's the point of any of these? We can't lose sight of this specific fact here in 1 Timothy chapter 4, 7 and 8. It says, "Rather, the point is to train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come." The point of all of this is the point of godliness, right? This isn't some self-help trick to be able to win friends and influence people. We're not learning all these things so we can just be more friendly as the main purpose, right? Those are great benefits that we get from the spiritual disciplines. The point of all of these, without fail, is the purpose of godliness. So today, as with every week, I'm not trying to convince you, Keaton's not been trying to convince you of some mystical practice that's going to do a magic trick where your spiritual life is going to be easier. That's not how this works. It's actually the opposite. If you have followed along with any of the challenges that we've done so far, you know that this isn't necessarily easier, right? It's a challenge. It's difficult to go about your day in a disciplined way. To be a disciplined Christian is far more work. And if you've done this, you know it. But it gives us a small glimpse of the enormous benefit of the desire to seek God, or our desire to know him in seeking him. So again, I ask the question, how can we, as Christians, combat the noise of the world in favor of a clear relationship with the Creator? According to Donald Whitney, solitude is the biblical practice of temporarily withdrawing to privacy for spiritual purposes. So we're talking about solitude this morning. And most of the time, because of its nature, solitude is also paired with silence. We're talking about spiritual disciplines. A lot of times you'll hear silence and solitude. And the purpose is because they go very well together, right? To be alone is typically to be quiet, I would hope. And to be quiet typically it goes along with solitude very well. Another author, John Mark Comer, says that he believes that silence and solitude is not only the most radical of all of the disciplines, but he also believes it to be the most misunderstood. So we can take a moment today to try to determine and understand, what's the point of this? How do we combat the noise, and how can we understand truly to find God in clarity? We love things like vacations, right? To get away. But do we ever do anything like that to intentionally develop our relationship with God? We get away, but we still go do things that are noisy and busy, and that's fine. Those are good things. But what about putting that type of effort into building the relationship with God? The world sometimes offers things like mindfulness. But mindfulness and meditation and things of the world like that are often devoid of God. They're completely self-centered. How can I reduce all of my thoughts and everything down to me so that I can be more effective, or I can get more money or have more friends? Spiritual silence and solitude is so selfless that sometimes it can be painful. Sometimes we're enjoying our period of peace and quiet with God, but other times we will leave with a deep pain at knowing our faults and knowing who we are before God alone. So solitude is not just about being alone. Okay, let's not misunderstand that either. It's not just about being alone. It's about being alone with God. And again, this is a difference between society's solution and God's. Typically, to energize ourselves or to recharge, we always go out with other people or to, again, enjoy vacation with a friend or a spouse. But it's one thing to be alone and to chill. It's another thing entirely to be alone with the Creator of the universe for the purpose of knowing Him better and to leave changed. You know, we apply this principle I'm about to mention to prayer all the time, right? If with prayer, how could we ever develop a relationship with God if we don't talk to Him, right? We understand that with our spouses, with our friends. We have to communicate in order to have a relationship. Well, the same could be said about solitude. How would mine and Ashley's relationship be if we never spent alone time together? Think about that. We were never alone. Now, I love Ashley, but she doesn't want to be around all of my friends all the time, just us, right? To be able to build a relationship, we have to have time alone to know each other and understand each other. Jesus knew this better than anyone, right? I think it would be a big mistake for us to study or understand any of these disciplines if we didn't understand how Jesus tried to model it for us. Right? In Matthew chapter 4, verse 1, it says that Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Right? And then we know he goes 40 days without food. He's tempted by the devil later, but he was led up by the Spirit to be alone. Matthew chapter 14, 23. After he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And it says, when evening came, he was there alone. Mark 1:35 says, and rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed, Jesus, departed and went to a desolate place, and there he prayed. Luke 4:42 says, when it was day, he departed and went into a desolate place, and the people sought him and came to him. Now that covers all but the Gospel of John, and it only covers several of the tons of examples where we get an idea and a glimpse into Jesus' practice of being alone with the Father. But I want to argue that these aren't just short glimpses into a random thing that Jesus did every now and then. This is a regular pattern of discipline that Jesus followed for the purpose of godliness. And you notice it in contrast to what he had been doing in the midst of all of those things, right? Before he went away, in most of these scenarios, he was surrounded by people, right? And in so many different times, the people come to him not just for teaching, they come to him to be healed. Now, let's be honest. Jesus healing people and Jesus teaching people, those are good things, right? Yeah, obviously. But Jesus even took time away from those good things in order to be alone with the Father. And that's important for us to recognize. So this morning, I want to share 3 ways that I can see silence and solitude aiding us in our attempt to draw closer to God. And I'm going to phrase them just like in 1 Timothy chapter 4. We see that our purpose is godliness, right? So we'll break that down even more. Solitude, first of all, is for the purpose of prayer. You know, we just read several verses about Jesus' example of when he went alone to be with the Father. And in almost every one of those, you can check it, go in all of the Gospels and find those scenarios. In at least 80% of them, you will find that it was incomplete without prayer. The times when Jesus was alone with God, he always found time to pray. And I love what he teaches in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6. Matthew 6:6, he says, when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. The whole point of Jesus' teaching on fasting and prayer in the Sermon on the Mount is that it's not about what other people think about us. And actually, in secret, praying in secret, developing a relationship with God in secret, ensures that the intentions of our spirituality are pure and unadulterated by pride and a desire to be seen. right? Jesus tells a parable of two men who prayed, and one did it with the desire to be seen and the other didn't. And Jesus is trying to tell us that when we're alone with God, it's the perfect chance to be honest with him, to find out our true intentions, and to know why we're really doing this. Is our spirituality and our faith performative? Do we only do it around other people when they expect it of us, or do we find the time knowing that it's important between us and God? I also love that Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. I was able to read that this week in a very different light. If you look in Luke chapter 22, verses 29 through 44, Luke records Jesus' actions in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right, he's going to, and actually you can think about it in this way. You remember when Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil? His alone time there for 40 days before he's tempted? That was right before a pivotal moment in his ministry. What comes right next? He's baptized, right? His ministry starts publicly, and he goes out to teach, to gather disciples. Well, here in a very similar way, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Luke chapter 22, when he's at the Mount of Olives with his disciples, what's coming next? His betrayal, arrest, trial, crucifixion. It's a pivotal moment in Jesus' time. Luke 22, starting verse 39, says this. And he came out and went, and as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. He knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed all more earnestly. And his sweat became like drops of blood falling down to the ground. And this little glimpse that we have in Scripture of Jesus' alone time. First, Jesus encourages his disciples to do the same thing. Do you notice that? He tells them when they come to the Mount of Olives, he's going to draw away from them, but he says to them to also take the time to pray not to enter into temptation. And then when he does that, he goes away by himself. And then when he prays, it's not just any prayer. Jesus doesn't just say a generic prayer, but he says what is possibly the most beautiful display of selfless trust in God that the universe has ever seen. Not my will, but yours be done. And then, because of the intensity of his prayer, an angel from God literally comes to him to give him strength. And then what does he do with that strength? He uses it to pray even more earnestly. Jesus' time alone in the garden here was saturated with prayer. When he had a chance to be with the Father, he made sure to communicate with him, to tell him what he was feeling, right? We don't think of Jesus in this way often, but he was begging if there was another way, that he didn't have to be beaten, tried falsely, to be flogged, to be humiliated, spat upon, and killed. He was asking for another way. But again, he says, "Not my will, but yours be done." Prayer at the dinner table is awesome. I wholeheartedly endorse that. Prayer to open a worship service is holy, and that's awesome. But there's something unique and special about a prayer that is spoken solely to be heard between me and God. That's different. And it gives us a chance to deepen our relationship with him intimately. The second purpose of solitude that I would argue for you this morning is to be able to reflect. Because of this noisy world that we live in, our brains are far too busy either actively doing something or something's being done to us. Now, let me give you an example. If I am responding to an email, my brain is having to actively work to do something, right? I'm having to formulate words and use it to try to not say something that will get me in trouble or whatever. I'm just typing things into a computer screen. But on the flip side, when we are watching a commercial on TV, our brains are being acted upon. Do you see the difference there? The commercial is trying to convince us of something, and our brains are absorbing it. We're not doing anything in that, but we're absorbing that information, and determining what to do with it. But if we don't ever take the time to be alone, do we ever have time to be neutral and to let our brains self-reflect and determine what has been good and what is bad? Have you ever felt frustrated with your struggle with sin? I mean, I know I have. And I know the struggle for me half the time comes from the fact that I know I need to do better, and I know that I can act more kindly, or I could choose a better thing in the temptation, but it just becomes this dull sense in the back of my mind that maybe one day it'll get better, or maybe one day I'll do something about it. And it's just ever present and it's always there. But the reason that happens, at least for me, is that we are too busy to appropriately confront, confess, and attack our sin. If we're not able to sit and determine, okay, why was I tempted by that? What can I do better? Maybe a prayer to the Father asking Him to give us the strength to handle it. Instead, we just drown it out with more and more noise. And we don't do it intentionally all the time. Sometimes we do. But taking appropriate, focused time with God to attack, confess, and confront our sin is a perfect example of how solitude can help us in our spiritual walk. There's no ability for self-reflection unless we practice silence and solitude. But reflection isn't just about conquering sin. It's also about understanding and discerning what God wants from us, right? The big question all the time is, what is God's plan for me? That's a big, broad question that we ask. You know, typically a lot of people my age are really just trying to struggle with that. What does God want me to do? Well, obviously we know that if we are pleasing to Him, it's not about what job we take or necessarily who our friends are. It's about making sure we are pleasing to Him. But there's an interesting story. We won't read it for time, but in 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah the prophet is in a very tough spot. His life is difficult. He's being pursued by Ahab and Jezebel. He's depressed. He's hungry. He's tired. He's in danger. He's exhausted. So he found a cave to live in. And when he found a cave to live in, there God met with Elijah and offered him sincere help and encouragement. Again, we won't read it, but as you look through 1 Kings 19, 9 through 18 or something, you see that God found Elijah in quietness, not even in the power that God could. The story is a fire passes by and a strong wind, and God wasn't in those. God's presence was in a low whisper. And Elijah was able to hear it because he was quieted and still. And then God leaves him with the encouragement in verse 18. He says that I will leave 7,000 in all of Israel that have not bowed to Baal. And there God encourages him to continue the fight. So many times retreating from danger and people and busyness is where we can actually find God and build a relationship with Him. I mean, honestly, how can we hear Him over the sound of planes and cars and sports events and cheering, phones ringing or YouTube playing? We have to withdraw sometimes, just like Jesus did. And if Jesus did, do we really think we don't need to? The third reason that I think solitude can help us, and this is possibly the most interesting and under-recognized. I didn't recognize it much until this study, but trusting God in silence and solitude is interesting. In the book that Keaton referenced at the beginning of the series, Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, he says, one reason we can hardly bear to remain silent is that it makes us feel so helpless. We are in a constant process of adjusting our public image, and silence is one of the deepest disciplines of the Spirit simply because it puts the stopper on all self-justification. One of the fruits of silence is the freedom to let God be our justifier. So typically when we pray, right, we have several aims, probably 3 different goals. We either are asking God for something, maybe asking him for help with a situation, asking for someone to be healed. Again, those are good things. Maybe the other thing is we're asking him for forgiveness for something we've done wrong. Also a very good thing. Or maybe we're thanking him. And two of those three things are not that they're not good, but they can also make us feel like we have a lot of control over the situation. Right? So we're asking for help and we're asking for forgiveness. And those help us. Obviously, we need God's help. And again, I'm not saying that. But sometimes we get in a rut thinking that we are controlling the situation through God. Right? That's why we kind of make the joke about how God is not a genie in a lamp, right? These are phenomenal goals for prayer. We need to continue that. But separately, in a different scenario, silence can help us develop trust in a way different than that. In Isaiah chapter 30, verses 15 through 17, is an interesting response that God gives to Israel. It's interesting because half the time God is really trying to grab Israel out of their rut and get them to do something about their failure and to come back to him. But here it's different. In Isaiah 30, verses 15 through 17, he says this: "Thus said the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and trust shall be your strength. But you were unwilling. You said, 'No, we will flee upon horses. We will ride upon swift steeds.' And therefore, God says, your pursuers shall be swift. 1,000 of you shall flee at the threat of one, and the threat of 5 you shall flee, until you are left like a flagstaff on the top of a mountain or a signal on a hill." Again, most of the time, in most cases and scenarios, God is begging the Israelites and even us today to act in holiness, to come back to him, to desire that he do something. But in sometimes, God is actually getting on to his children because they tried to do it of their own will and not trust in him. And that's why he says in this verse that in quietness and trust they will have strength. Imagine the way that this impacts the world, the way that we interact with the world. You know, we go out and thankfully we live in a country where we have the ability to vote, right? We can impact politics a little bit. We can do things about our workplace or our home that we do have the ability to change and affect and control. But what if we were disciplined enough to quiet the anxiety that we have and our need to intervene and to always control a situation and learn to trust in his power and his plan? Right? I mean, think about everything going on in the world. We can only do so much, but the anxiety, just like the noise, is constantly in the back of our heads, struggling, causing us to struggle. And we're worried and worried and worried. You think back to Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount, that we shouldn't worry about what we eat or drink or what we wear, because God clothes even the sparrows. And he's going to take care of us. Solitude is a practice where we can know that he is in control and not worry about trying to fix everything ourselves. Richard Foster also said, "If we possess inward solitude, we do not fear being alone, for we know that we are not alone. Neither do we fear being with others because they don't control us." If you turn to Psalm chapter 131, let's see how David said it. In Psalm 131, in a very short psalm, 3 verses, David says this in a beautiful way. "O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high, for I do not occupy myself with things that are too great and too marvelous for me. But I have calmed and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. John Mark Comer, in one of his books, gave some consequences of not living a life of solitude and silence with God. And I think this helps us to understand maybe if we're struggling with some of these things, it might be because we're not disciplined in this area. Here's a couple of the things that he says. Some of the consequences of not living a life of silence and solitude are living hurriedly, being under the primary influence of worldly things, maybe losing sight of our purpose in this life. Maybe we lose sight of who God is and in His presence. Maybe we live with perpetual anxiety. And often we fix our souls with things other than God. Often vices and things that ensnare us. But in contrast to those, what if we encourage each other to think biblically about this? In Psalm 46, verse 10 again, it says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." This week's challenge, as we do every week, we offer a challenge, if you haven't been here with us before, to encourage you to participate in these disciplines. Right? It's one thing to just sit and talk about them all day long, all week long, all summer long. It's a very different thing to actually put them into practice. So our challenge today for this week is I'm encouraging you to spend 30 minutes per day in silence and solitude for spiritual purposes. Now again, I want to remind you that last little bit, for spiritual purposes. This is different than just simply being alone just to have an excuse to get away from people, okay? That is nice. It's a great benefit. But this is intentionally for the purpose of being not just alone with yourself, but to be alone with God. So this could be in a 30-minute chunk. You might wake up 30 minutes earlier in the day to spend that time alone before anyone else in the house is awake. Maybe you stay up 30 minutes later and you take that chance to pray, to trust, to reflect. Or maybe, because we do have a busy schedule and we're trying to ease into this sometimes, maybe you find the little moments of silence through the day. And instead of cranking up the radio, or instead of getting on Instagram, what if we take the chance to take that time for silence and solitude with God? I think we're going to be a lot more calm as people if we learn this. And I think we'll also learn to, we'll have that anxiety and the noise that just is dull in the background will seem to fade. But however you do it, in that time, whether it's 5 minutes at a time or 30 minutes at a time, fight the urge to let your mind focus on your busy calendar. And fight the urge to read a book. But instead, sit silently, pray, reflect, and trust in Him. The world is noisy, right? And we often let the noise of the world overrun our focus on God. If you're distracted, I beg you this morning to return to Him in quietness and trust, as He said in Isaiah. If you have never ultimately displayed that trust and faith in God through baptism, we want to offer that to you today. We offer it every Sunday. Every time you're in the presence of God's people, I hope the invitation to salvation is open. And again, if you've never been here before, we leave these front pews open for the purpose of you being able to come forward and let us know what your needs are, whether that is prayers from the church or salvation today. We'd love to talk with you. If you have any other needs, I hope that you'll come forward now as we stand and sing.